Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. And today we are continuing our mini-series about penetration testing and have some great topics and considerations to cover. But before that, why don't you kick us off with the news in the usual fashion, Mike?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the news today. First, we're going to start out with Russian hacker pleads guilty to planting malware in Tesla Gigafactory. Apparently, this guy was an employee working at a Tesla Gigafactory. He was offered $1 million in Bitcoin if they facilitated an attack. Also, he planned to carry out a distributed denial of service attack, which would have diverted the company's attention, paving way for another attack. Watch your employees. Firms urged to patch as attackers exploit critical F5 bugs. There's a new CVE out there, 2021-22986. It's a flaw in REST-based eye control management interface, which could allow for authentication bypass and remote code execution. It's got a rating of 9.8. Popular remote lesson monitoring program can be exploited to attack student PCs. This is kind of disconcerting. There's a new teaching tool called NetApp Vision Pro, which contained vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Basically, you were not able to encrypt the network traffic, and students would automatically start sending screenshots to the teacher, whether they knew it or expected to do so or not. We've got another disgruntled employee, an admin with an axe to grind, sent to prison for wiping Microsoft user accounts. This is basically everybody's worst nightmare. 32-year-old employee was fired, went back to India. While he was outside the U.S., he deleted 80% of the employer's Microsoft 365 accounts. Needless to say, the company ground to a halt for a while. And he's going to jail for 2 years. So there's that. Back in the Wayback Machine, everybody remember Melissa, the first big virus? It managed to disrupt hundreds of networks, including those of Microsoft. This was back in March of 1999. At least 100,000 workplace computers were affected. Understanding remote work security, that's the world we're in today, and really what it comes down to. It's an interesting little article, but it's basically a breach of one employee's laptop is bad, but a breach of an entire company's infrastructure and potentially everyone connected to it is much worse. So what's happening is companies are finding it more difficult to keep remote employees secure than to prevent malware on a remote laptop from infecting infrastructure. This I added because I simply like saying Purple Fox Rootkit. Purple Fox Rootkit can now spread itself to other Windows computers. There's 90,000 incidents that have been spotted in the wild through 2020 and the beginning of 2021. It's got a novel spreading technique using indiscriminate port scanning and exploitation of exposed SMB services with weak passwords and hashes. How many times you get those internal scans and go, oh, it's just SMB, we're not going to worry about fixing that? Well, guess what? Purple Fox Rootkit is looking for you. Phishing leads to breach of California State Controller. This one I kind of laugh at because, I mean, it's serious, but basically what happened is there was a phishing attack that wound up exploiting the State Controller's Office of California. Phishers had access for more than 24 hours. The intruders used that time to steal social security numbers and sensitive files of thousands of state workers and to send targeted phishing messages to at least 9,000 other workers and their contacts. The reason I kind of laugh at that is because in October 2020, someone in their great wisdom at the California Department of Technology decided to exclude managers and supervisors from being phish tested using dynamic testing. They had to know everything about it. So basically they gutted their testing and wound up getting hacked because of it. Black Kingdom ransomware hunting unpatched Microsoft Exchange servers. Yep, that's still happening. There's another attack out there. They're trying to exploit anybody that has not patched. And if you haven't patched yet, I'm sorry. 2/3 of large firms attacked as COVID-19 hampers security. From 27% of businesses experience attacks at least once a week, with phishing at 83% and impersonation 27% most common. A fifth, 21% of those reporting attacks end up losing money, data, or other assets as a result, and 35% reported other negative consequences, such as business disruption or a loss of staff productivity. A critical Cisco Jabberbug could let attackers hack remote systems. It allows you to execute arbitrary programs on the underlying operating system. cause a DDoS, intercept protected traffic, or access sensitive information. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end out the headlines. Go ahead, Laurel.
Purple Fox Rootkit. I like that. That's kind of cool. Yeah, the clever names. Yeah. Like you said, if you haven't patched already, time to give up IT. In the exploit world this week, we really only have one to be of concern about, and that's with an online IDE. It's an integrated development environment, basically a SaaS platform that allows you development capabilities. It's called CodiDad, and there was a remote code execution that was provided via Python to as a module for Metasploit. Fantastic. All you need to do is get a demo account, and you need to be authenticated for the RCE to work. But that's super easy to get through the application. So this has been communicated to CodiDad, and they've hopefully been remediating this. But just as a cautionary tale to everybody, be wary of using online platforms to do your development on. Okay, they're not all really doing their security testing or penetration testing, which brings us to the circle of conversation today. But that's really, I think, all to be aware of this week for exploits in the wild that are going to be weaponized in Metasploit Pro or Metasploit Framework if you like the free version.
Well, as we continue our discussion about penetration testing, our goal through these podcasts, of course, is to answer a lot of common questions that come up that we hear about these various topics. And so today we want to dive into a few more topics about penetration testing and just address various approaches and reporting and such. But before we dive into that, how often do you think somebody should get a penetration test? That's a very, very valid concern that a lot of people have. And what would you advise them when they're wondering, well, what frequency is appropriate for our organization?
Great entryway, I think, and certainly something we hear a lot. There's a couple ways to answer this question. And so if you're going to ask somebody who is doing this for a living, they're going to tell you the more frequent, the better. There are products out there that will actually let you do round-the-clock live campaign testing in your own networks. And so, you can be as proactive as you want to. What I will say is that annually is probably just now scratching the bare minimum. And that seems to be what the theme was for a long time, because traditionally these were more complicated and there was a lot more convolutedness in what was occurred, and there was a lot less canned reports back in the day. So they felt once a week or once a year was adequate. I think in a lot of the governance frameworks, NIST and old PCI and things like that would require an annual pen test. And that's probably great. So, I guess it comes back to what your intent is. Your intent to check a box, then once a year is probably frequent enough. But if you're concerned and you're not sleeping well at night because, you've got development staff that are making changes, or you've got infrastructure changes that are going on, or you're migrating things from an on-prem environment to the cloud, and there's changes happening that aren't giving you that high confidence of a low risk environment that you may be used to having. And so something like that may cause you to ramp the frequency in your pen testing. I think quarterly is really going to be the standard. What frameworks like PCI will throw in some, I call it magician's language, to kind of allow you to essentially draw your own, draw your own firing squad. So they'll say things like upon significant changes, right? So pen testing should occur annually and upon significant changes. Here's the thing, is that PCI, and we don't know about 4 yet, but they won't necessarily define what a significant change is, nor can they in your environment, right? That's up for your business to decide. So most businesses, we say they choose not to define it, and therefore they're not held to any accountability of any kind. Now, if they define a significant change as an updated to jQuery library in your web application, for example, that would denote a pen test, right, under the guise of the PCI language. And so again, you draw your firing squad. So you can write yourself into a really, really expensive around the clock penetration testing routine. However, while that business people may look at that as costly, all your security governance and financial risk people are going to look at that as proactive, right? We have now a very current risk snapshot of the environment and all the changes that are happening. If you're just trying to check the block and you don't really care about the business that you're serving, then maybe annually is going to be your number to go for. And if you're part of an IT department and you've got a lot of changes going on and you really care about understanding the protective posture of the organization at any given time, then you may want to at least do quarterly, maybe monthly. Maybe you should define those significant changes and what they mean to you if you're bound by PCI. And if you're really, really trying to step it up above everybody else, then you can grab one of your products, deploy it, and you can perform around the clock pen testing on everything.
I would include HIPAA as well in that. As far as
absolutely, Mike. Thank you for that. Good point. Yeah, HIPAA is going to be requiring that. I think, doesn't SOC require that as well?
SOC has a pen test requirement, but it doesn't delineate how frequently, other than annually. But I think that needs to be updated as well. If you truly care about what you're doing and you truly have sensitive data, the desire would be that you would be proactive in testing it minimum quarterly.
One of the things that we see out there in the wild, with different industries, it's interesting because we work with a variety of different industries, but I think the ones that are most proactive are really those B2B technology companies where other organizations are relying on their products and their environment. They seem to be a little bit more frequent in their testing and analysis and such, right? And I think part of that too, it goes to a bigger picture, a bigger discussion about risk in general and what the organization is willing to allow or accept. The reason being take a B2B technology company, for example, software as a service platform, let's just say, their software is their brand, right? So if that goes, their brand goes, the company goes, it's all done, right? The credibility out the window versus let's take like maybe a regional credit union or bank, for example, where there it's not so much, the entity still is a brand bigger than any one application or any one platform that they're using. So the considerations may be different, right? Or healthcare companies, same type of thing. So it doesn't make it right to do it less frequently, for sure. But of course, all companies have limited resources. But I would encourage everybody listening that to do something, right? Doing something is always better than doing nothing. And it blows my mind, but there's still lots of companies out there who have never had a penetration test or haven't had one in the last 3 to 5 years.
It's startling how many haven't, really.
Yeah, it's almost like if they're not beholden to some compliance requirement or some client requirement, there are a lot of organizations that they're not taking it on their own initiative to do them. So
we still hear that argument. I've got nothing that anybody wants to steal, and it's just dangerous.
Crazy. Well, that's good overview. Some good considerations on timing and such when you should get these things done. Generally speaking, too, you probably get better rates if you do these activities earlier in the year rather than wait till the end of the year, fourth quarter. Just because, from being in the business, we see everybody jumping through hoops to get their pen test done the last minute before the end of the year, and as such, the higher demand, they cost more. Right. So it's better to kind of space them out throughout the year, plan them, be proactive, rather than trying to jump through hoops to meet a compliance requirement. That said, there's a handful of different approaches, and figure we'd touch on that for a little bit. I mean, what are your opinions on red team approach versus a purple team approach? I mean, you want to start by describing both and the differences and then just dive in a little bit, because I know it's very common in our industry for pen testing to just kind of happen in a vacuum. Company will say, okay, give me the targets. We're going to do the work and we're going to send you a report. But I don't think that's the best approach always. Do you want to touch on the differences and pros and cons of each?
Yeah, absolutely. So traditionally speaking, in a mature organization, you'd have a defensive team that was, maybe running your security operations center inside, or, had some security telemetry that they're looking at, whether, there's a lot of products I don't want to name right now. In any case, that's going to be your blue team. right? And traditionally, those are the defensive security team members that are, watching the boundary, watching the log files, watching things happen at the firewall, managing changes, those sorts of things that are kind of in that role of defensive cybersecurity. Another mature perspective is to also have a red team, and those would be another team that would simulate attackers, and they would help the blue team understand what indicators of attack look like and what indicators of compromise look like. And so in the penetration testing and the threat hunting world, that's kind of where the desire is to be as part of the red team, essentially, right? And what Silent Sector does is a version of both, right? We call it a purple team approach. It's been defined prior to us, of course, but essentially it's a blend, right? We don't operate in a vacuum, and we recommend that's how the technical assessment, the threat hunt, or the penetration test, whatever you're going to refer to it, or however far you're going to go with the assessment, should be referred to as. And what that is essentially is a team-based approach, so that we can train the internal response teams. Now, your blue team, you might have a mature cybersecurity organization. Okay, you may just be a small B2B, and you've got 2 network guys and a server guy. That's your blue team. Okay, they've probably, because they're jack of all trades and they're running the small shop, they've got a lot of logging tools at their disposal, and they've probably got some parsing going on. So they're already running traps, right, for basic things that they just need to know to keep the business running, right? And that's like a good thing about it's one of those things where I always feel bad for those really, really smart one IT shop, humans that are just keeping everything going, because they need reprieve, right? They need a team of 3 or 4 or 5 to really do the job well, but they've got a lot of capability because they're so used to handling things that they'll write a lot of traps for all kinds of things and not really understand that this is actually part of a blue team exercise, right? And so when the website goes down and you had some random script on a server that was just randomly pinging an item on the page, that's going to tell you that something strange has happened. And so it could be an indicator of attack. It could be an indicator of compromise. It could just be, that the hosting provider went down. But that's sort of the what we're looking at when we conduct these exercises. So purple team is certainly the approach that I would consider that you should prefer for those that are asking. Any teams that conduct any exercises or technical assessments against your assets, they should work with you, and they should let you know when they're starting. They should also let you know when they find things, right? You shouldn't have to wait 40 hours or 60 hours beyond the end of the test period to obtain results that say, hey, you have this critical vulnerability that I was able to get a shell out of, or create accounts, or all these random things. They should let you know immediately. And then you should also, purple team exercises are also really good because you can schedule these events. And so the teams inside, right, your networking guy, your IT guy, or if you're in a mature organization, your blue team, can now know when the testing period starts, and they can start looking for those indicators of compromise or indicators of attack. And then they can then, go through their incident response protocol in order to, pretend the war game is real, and what they would do to silence the attack, right? And so you get a kind of a both benefit out of it. You're not only meeting requirements from compliance, you're actually getting a pen test to look at that attack surface that's in the target scope, but now you're also working to train the internal IT staff and other staff to know what this type of traffic, this aggressive scanning, and these types of inquiries to the electronic assets look like at a telemetry level, at the log files, and what types of dashboards they may have today, or log aggregation they may have today. And you can train them to see what that looks like. So when the testing period's over and something happens in the wild, they're better suited to acknowledge that what's happening, and then if necessary, activate incident response protocol, or even shut those activities down. So I certainly think purple team is the way to go. Mike, what do you see? Is that typical? How you feel about what you see for SOCs?
I think it's evolving, right? A long time ago, it was just penetration test was just a commodity. You paid someone to come do it, and then they looked at the results and the pretty charts and said, "Thank you very much. We'll see you in a year." But no, I think the engagement of the internal team is really very beneficial for 2 reasons. One, they understand what you're doing and why and where the attack vectors are. It's an educational process. And two, it's really testing their ability to respond. And we see that to varying degrees of success and failure. A lot of people put so much faith in their tools that they fail to understand the human element of it. And that's where the purple team will expose those weaknesses. Just like testing your DR plan or your IR plan, right? You need to test your daily attack plan, your attack vector plan, that sort of thing. You need to be able to test everything all the time, because things just don't automatically work, right?
They never automatically work. And a lot of times we've seen in the small B2B world that they have better success writing something custom and small than buying some big tool.
Right.
It's usually the custom small thing that, a great example is Slowpost. Okay, there's really not a lot of tools that they can prevent the attack, but they won't identify it in the stream of traffic. And one of, somebody we know wrote a small script to just look to see if the just to check the website up or down. And they weren't able to tell that Slowpost was the denial of service that was occurring, but they knew that the site was down, right? And it was just, they didn't need anything fancy. It was a 15-minute script, that they just ran.
Right.
So, it's better to be clever sometimes with what you have than, to certainly try to spend on big tools.
Yeah, exactly. And, relying, just to bring back SolarWinds actually as a case in point, that was just a standard update that wound up blowing up infrastructure all over the place. Things don't work the way they're supposed to all the time. So
yeah, trusted software, not so trusted.
Right. But yeah, a script that you write yourself takes you 15 minutes to write. You can test. It generally works. Hard to exploit.
Yeah, you know what you put into it? I call that organic, sort of.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of hype in the cybersecurity industry around all this stuff that you should have, all this stuff that, are great features and functionality. But the reality is that companies, especially when you look at mid-market and emerging size companies, they need the results. They need, it's not so much about being efficient as it is about being effective, right? They need to be doing the right things. They don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles. I think there's a lot to be said there, but so those are some really good considerations around frequency of testing, what type of approach, and then finally, another thing that comes up, people ask, well, what should I get out of a penetration test? I went through this, paid my money. What do I get for it? And of course, that comes down to really reporting and hopefully some ongoing consultation, right? And hopefully those things are customized to your organization and not just a canned approach. But what do you see as far as the most effective, pieces of a report, the most meaningful documentation? What do you see that being for the client?
The sad thing is that a lot of these reports that we put a lot of time into, and a lot of people put a lot of time into, everybody reads the first 3 pages and that's it. They look at the pretty color graphs, and a lot of it gets wasted. I really encourage people to actually dig into the meat of these reports.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, no, good point, Mike. And here's the thing: is that most of leadership, all they care about is like, did they find anything that is gonna lose our business today, right? That's kind of the common thing that leadership wants to know, right? Do we have something that's exploitable today? The technical teams typically are, I when something's not found, but even us, right? We always encourage them, like in the reports. But here, I'll go ahead and pull out the lectern for a minute, because I have a lot of complaints in this department. So I didn't bring the complaint box because I couldn't pull it with the 1-ton truck. So I have a lot of animosity towards some security organizations that just give you a report that just pulls out some crap, like your X options aren't set for cross-site scripting, right? Your cross origins, or your secure cookie settings aren't there, or HTTP 80 is allowed on the site, even though there's a redirect. It's like, why don't you take a moment to go out back and slap yourself, and then come back and try to give the organization something of value? And I think that's really the biggest thing here, is that report should include something valuable to you. Okay. Now there's always going to be trivial misconfigurations that are found. Okay. And we've talked about this in previous episodes, where there's a big difference between something that's vulnerable and something that's exploitable, which is why, they're in the news that Mike gives. We're always going to hear about, patches that need to come out that vendors have found on themselves that say, oh, this could cause, remote code execution. Okay. there's not an exploit out today for that. That doesn't mean that something couldn't be developed, but there's a lot of time and man hours and research, and there's a lot that goes into the development of exploit. Okay, it's not something that you can just poof and there it is. Depending on the type of software involved, sometimes you can do that, right? Sometimes there's a 20-minute script you can write that'll work. A lot of times it's a 100 or 200 hour endeavor, and you've got to have access to some source code. So you want meaningful things that are exploitable, right? Things that I have a shell script today for that I could drop in. I have a payload to drop into Metasploit today and point it at your system, and I get a shell that I can log in with right now. That's what matters, right? That's what should matter, and that's what all these threat huts and the pen test should be looking for. And the report in the first 3 pages to not only say that, but if none of that's there, it should give you, excellent marks for having a defensive depth cybersecurity program, right? And protocols that you put in place. And then should also include the reports that are going to have all those details, all that, the trivial misconfigurations that may be there. I'm not saying we're going to let you know that, yes, these trivial misconfigurations are found. Your web server is still open on port 80 and it does a redirect to 443. There's no criticality exploits, attack vectors that are going to cause you any harm here. However, it would probably be of best practice to go ahead and, considering how modern browsers works, to go ahead and close that port 80 and not even offer the redirect anymore, just force everything on 443. That's not our decision. That's an architectural model change. That's something they should do, but I'm not going to call this out as a high vulnerability or a critical thing saying that, your website can get hacked now because you allow it on port 80. Right. So, okay, I'll stop. Mike, what'd I miss?
Well, just at that point, I would say, if you've got close anything that you don't need open, first of all. Sure. I'd start with that. If you don't need port 80, close port 80, and there's no reason traffic should be over port 80 anyway. But no, we've seen, unfortunately, the position that we have seen, we have some professional paranoia, and we've seen a lot of bad things because that's why we're here. We're to focus on the bad things and fix them and make them good things, right? So, I think you're spot on, Laura. I think that's some very good points. There's one other thing I want to bring up real quick, and we don't have time to talk about it in depth today, but internal pen testing really needs to be something that needs to be considered, because what we're seeing is a lot of these bulletproof, Palo Altos and F5s, and although F5 has issues right now. But anyway, these bulletproof perimeters, and then the inside is just soft candy, like an M&M. So we need to start talking about internal pen testing, and people need to start investing in that as well.
No, good point, man. We don't see enough of that, and when we do get an opportunity, that's where all the fun happens from a pen test perspective. Yeah. On the internal pen testing, everybody is put all their focus on the hard crusted exterior. It's just like the Death Star, right? Yeah. No one considered the little port. No one considered that, right? And I'm sure there was some auditor that was like, I don't think I think this could be smaller because, it's a womp rat could get in here, and technically a missile might be able to come in here. So certainly look at internal pen testing. And one final thing is on that report, right? You should get the report, but you don't ever want to share that report with third parties, because even though it may not have found any exploitable items, it's still going to have intimate details about your organization, about your technical controls, about your technical assets. You don't want to just give it away.
Right.
So you should always, whatever organization that you work with should provide you a letter of attestation for that pen test. That's a publicly digestible document that says, we're a third-party firm. This is what we do. And these are our certifications, and this is what we conducted against the environment, and we attest it, it was a low risk or whatever, right, that we found. So that's what you should be providing you should get that as part of your pen test report so that you can provide that to third parties, customers, clients may be asking for it.
Excellent point. Don't share your penetration test reports. It's so amazing how many people say, "Oh yeah, this prospect wanted it, so he sent it to him."
Yeah, and let me jump into and just to point this out. Like when it doesn't matter if it's a governance security person or some prospect, they're going to put it on a SharePoint site on a public drive someplace in their organization where who knows who has access to it. Keep that in mind.
Yeah,
might as well just fork it over to the cyber criminals.
Yeah.
Well, good stuff, and I think there's a lot more to talk about here. I mean, this is a deep topic, but hopefully we're answering some of your questions for those of you listening, getting through some of the common things that we hear out there, and hopefully it helps you. So thank you so much for joining us. Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and that will help us too if you provide some insight about what you want to hear, what questions you have. We're happy to answer them. Thanks a lot, and have a great day.
Take care.
Take care.
Pick up your copy of the Cyber Rants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the Cyber Rants podcast.